the grad students, they are not here.
Hmm?
Usually on Friday, the grad students from FAST, they are not here. No,
Well,
because it's the same at FRJ, like Friday is not such a crowded day.
well, especially at night. But
Yes.
in the morning, I think it's normal.
Okay. Bom, bom dia. É um prazer imenso aqui dar início a essa sessão. Eu vou falar em português inicialmente, pois a nossa convidada especial entende português, mas se for bem pausadamente. E acho que será certamente mais inclusivo com todos os presentes, né? O Rochon está aqui? Não. Então será, com certeza. Bom, é um prazer imenso dar início a essa sessão. Obrigada pela presença de todos vocês. A gente tem dois convidados muito especiais. A Mariângela, ela é uma economista sênior nas Nações Unidas. Ela faz parte, né, ela é a chefe de uma unidade das Nações Unidas chamada Strategic Engagement and Policy Integration, na DESA, que é o Departamento de Economic Social Affairs. Ela liderou diversas iniciativas, né, dentro da ONU, incluindo, mais recentemente, o Fórum Intergovernamental para o Financiamento e para o Desenvolvimento, né? Todos esses fóruns recentes de desenvolvimento sustentável para investidores globais, ela também é uma das economistas líderes, né? Fez a sua tese de doutorado na New School, com William Milberg, e tem diversas publicações, né, artigos, capítulos de livros, na área de desenvolvimento econômico, comércio internacional, discussões sobre termos de troca. Então, a gente está muito honrado de te receber, viu, Mariângela? Para mim, inclusive, é um prazer pessoal, né? Eu tive a oportunidade de trabalhar com ela por um período muito curto, e posso dizer com toda a tranquilidade que é uma das pessoas mais generosas que eu já conheci. Então, para mim, é uma alegria, porque eu acho que, além da competência, essa é uma virtude que a gente tem que promover na academia, né? A generosidade. Tá? O João é nosso né, convidado também aqui, vai ser o nosso comentarista. Ele é professor aqui na UFMG e acho que tem também aquela virtude de ser um economista que pensa as questões concretas, né? Tem um papel ativo de diálogo como divulgador científico, além de uma formação de excelência, como a gente já sabe, né? Então, a Mariângela, você tem mais ou menos 1 hora, tá? Pode ser menos, pode ser um pouquinho mais, e aí a gente abre para o João formular algumas questões e a gente abre para todo mundo, tá bom? Muito obrigada.
Thank you so much, Marilia. It's really such a pleasure for me to be here. These 3 days have been kind of I don't know, something I really needed. And I'm really grateful to you and personally also to see you and your family. It's amazing. So thank you, everybody, for coming. Today I'm going to talk about external trade. And I'm going to be talking mostly about the work I did for my dissertation and the work I did at the UN before joining in New York. And then, so I'm going to start by saying it's mostly my work. And I mean, all of you are familiar with the Prebisch and Singer hypothesis. And for me, it was very significant that Prebisch was working in ECLAC, where I had the honor to work also, and then Singer was working in New York. And their ideas were not United Nations ideas up until they were politically very, very, they had a lot of polemic around them, and they created really movements. So I'm going to talk about that. And these ideas, most of them are mine, but I'm hoping that through research and hard work, they can become something that the UN can be advocating for too. Well, let me stand first by saying that I'm talking about trade, and I wanted to put this kind of like a spiral, saying right now all the 7 areas that I spoke on Tuesday are kind of lost in the many crises that we have. And one of the places in which the situation is even more difficult and has not moved at all or has moved backward is on trade. And the idea, I'm going to start by thinking about what commoditization means for societies, for commodities, and for manufacturers. And if there is anything we can do, I have a few ideas there. So commoditization is something that has been happening for many, many years, as I will speak later. And for me, as a UN staff, we want sustainable development. We want to happen it as soon as possible. We want it to be inclusive. Yet the forces of the market are not really going there. Sustainable development would really depend on policies and ideas that really promote investments in peoples, in relationships, and not necessarily on goods that can be commoditized. Why? Because commoditization is really kind of like a road to the bottom, that Darwinian selection pressure that's completely driven by profit and by efficiency seeking in the investment of key resources. So commoditization, according to this author and what I have observed in my work, is that it really leads to the underdevelopment of the economy of relationships, of labor, and the overdevelopment of the economy of things. And that's what we have, an overdevelopment of the sphere of the market, and everything else doesn't matter. In business management, commoditization is a threat. Like if you read any administration books instead of economic books, commoditization is something that can really be bad for a company that's just selling. So because commoditization implies always driving prices lower. But this threat is historically has been completely asymmetrical. It in general has affected developing countries more than developed countries, and it is a general threat for final products. But as we have seen, and as I will explain later, it has been really a welcome development for factors and raw materials, primary products, and as I would argue later, also manufacturers, since global value chains. Why? Because commoditization removes completely any characteristics from the producer, from the uniqueness and brand. The products become completely interchangeable. And obviously that's perfect for those who are buying. But for the producers, it is not. You don't want to be just one of the 100 companies that produce the same thing exactly, and then whatever issue happens, they just move to the next place. And you don't want to be a producer of primary commodities because the prices are insane because of the way they are structured. So we have been living in a world in which everything is being commoditized, even labor. And this makes that we are only competing, especially developing countries are left to compete only on basis of prices, only low prices, low costs. And this is not conducive to development. So this is nothing new. I mean, the role of developing countries in the International Division of Labor has always been commodities. At least it has been like that for the last 150 years. So it was inherited from colonial trade. Developing countries were expected to produce primary products and by manufacturers. And that was exactly the gist that Previs and Singer wanted to put out, because the theory of comparative advantage would mean that it's okay to export whatever you export, it doesn't matter. But that's not the truth. But my point is to go a little bit beyond what Previs and Singer were saying, because for them, the only way to to produce and export primary products was as commodities in the international market, in traded as something that was completely generic. But this is a historical construct. It's not a fact of nature that we have to export coffee or cocoa or anything else like that. In fact, it used to be different. It used to be you would go and buy in the farm, and you would have a personal relationship with the farmer, and you would, and your prices will depend on how reliable you were and how good your product was. But obviously, that was not very efficient. And in the lookout for efficiency and low inputs for the development of developed countries, they created all sorts of institutions to completely mix all the products so that they would not have any characteristics that would that would cut this idea of getting the lowest price possible for everything. So this became a norm, but it is not that old. So for coffee, it started in 1881. You may say, yes, that has been for a very, very long time, but it's still a construction from men. It's not a natural fact. For cocoa, the first time that they did this was 1925. And for rubber, it was 1913. So you may argue that without standardizing, developing countries would have never been able to export a lot. And in that sense, their exports could have contributed very little to their economic development. That was kind of the big argument. But in my view, the standardization in itself is another manifestation of the center-periphery organization of the global economy. By transforming primary products, in this case, into commodities, the economic power over them was further transferred from the producer to the consumers that are mostly located in developed countries, and also to the intermediaries, the toasters, the companies that are benefiting from it, and even more now, as I will show later. So, and it's clear, like the certainty of receiving primary products as a quasi-perfect competition price was undoubtedly instrumental for the industrialization in the developed world. But for developing countries, it was never a panacea. I mean, initially it was, and when Prebisch started his career, Argentina was benefiting from Britain buying a lot of their commodities. But very soon, the US started to be kind of the main importer from them, and they realized that the US was much more bigger, so they didn't have so much need of primary commodities. So the prices and the balance of payments of Argentina started to be worse very easily. And because of this, Prebisch and Singer really went through, say, like, you can attribute this underdevelopment and this difficulty that we keep having through the commodities that we only produce, and that the prices are not determined by us, but by perfect competition. Before the 80s, it was tackled with international commodity agreements, the coffee that you all know, and it helped for a long time. But then came the 80s, in which for diverse political issues, it became important to be against public intervention, against any kind of government decision. So obviously the commodity agreements started to disappear. Only for oil it remains today, and it has different implications. But so obviously we had a lot of liberalization and deregulation policies. So I was very inclined to continue this research because their hypothesis that that the terms of trade of primary products was going down over time. It has been always considered like one of the most powerful economic theories, because developing countries seem to be exporting a lot, but not getting that much from trade. So countries have been stuck in a commodity problem that have made development very hard. So I started working on this, and I wrote a few papers with Jose Antonio Campo. And this is not something that was forgotten in the past from their time. Because primary commodities have prices that come from so long, they are a very long time series. So it has been studied with every econometric method that you can think. If you open the G-Store this year, I'm sure you can see the new techniques for time series being evaluated again and again and again. And this is the work that we did with these historical prices. And what we found was that it was not a decline that was permanent, for which many people are saying, oh, so that's not true because it's not a permanent decline. But we found really big structural changes. So we found that in the crisis of the 20s, the commodity prices went certainly down. And then in the crisis of the 80s, again. If I didn't update this data, but when I do it, I'm sure it's going to show going up until 2013, 15 maybe, and then going down. And this is mostly for for agricultural products. So metals and oil, it's different. You can really see. And it might have affected much more tropical commodities. Tropical commodities are the commodities that cannot be produced in developed countries. So again, this is an asymmetry of the global economy. It has always been like this. So you may argue, okay, if it's always been like this, how can we change it? Well, I don't know. Somebody said that dreams that are achieved are only the ones that you try to achieve. So I think there are policies that can be made, and at the UN, when I bring these issues, I'm always kind of faced with colleagues saying, well, but those are the forces of the markets. Those are the political economy that we have. Well, I have a few arguments to say, okay, even if that's true, we have to start somewhere. And people and countries are starting. And that has to be promoted as much as possible. So just going to be very quickly through the two variants of President Singer. So one was that there was difference between the markets for primary commodities and for manufacturers. And the second one, that there were asymmetries between the functioning of the labor markets in developed and developing countries. So with these two, there was always a latent risk that this would also happen for manufacturers. But still, I mean, up until the 80s, 90s, manufacturing and industrialization was the only way, and that was kind of the way to go. And we all know that industrialization is not important because of what you export. It's important because of the structural change it generates in your economies and for many other things. Okay. So for the first assumption, you think that the income elasticity for primary commodities is very low. So it's higher for manufacturers. But we have been living in a global value chain world for a while. And in a global value chain world, the demand that the producers in developing countries are faced with is not that of the final product that goes to the consumer. It is that of the chain of intermediaries and processor. So it's not even if the price elasticity of the final product is high, and we buy coffee at $5 in New York, the price that they face, the elasticity that the producers face, is very low. It's that of the perfect competition that traders and processing companies have. And this is as true in manufacturers, as I will show, as it was always in primary products. The second one was that just in the labor market, in developed countries, labor was able to defend themselves more. They had trade unions, labor unions. They had also a relationship between productivity and wages that was profitable. That was good for the workers. But this has changed completely in the last 30, 40 years. The relationship between productivity and wage increases has completely disassociated itself in the US, and you cannot say that productivity is benefiting workers. We know who it is benefiting, is the companies. And so, and in terms of manufacturers also, China's entrance to the global economy, in the global value chains, well, it certainly kind of accelerated things, but this is a trend that was coming before. Since the 70s, this was already being noticed, that because countries were able to produce things at high quality, technical way, they started to be seen as possible competition. So there was a corporate strategy to really kind of make them part of their value chains, and at the same time make them produce at lower prices. So this global value chain strategy allowed the businesses to keep the prices low, but who had the risk now? It was the producers. So this is the world of global value chains that we have been in. All right. So for me, like when I was studying, it was clear that the rise of the West was possible. Like Amzeb was saying, we see the tigers of East Asia, and we also saw China. But this corporate strategy shift really perpetuated or reinstated the center-periphery relationship in the manufactured sectors. That was a characteristic from the primary commodities. And the center reclaimed its position in the production of manufacturers by offshoring production in the periphery, while specializing in the more profitable parts of the chain. And this is related to the issues that we discussed on Tuesday. This related to financialization, technological progress that is very asymmetrical, and this really gave the impression that it was possible to really grow through this way, that it was easier than just one country trying to sell a final product. It was just as much easier to sell parts of it, but the losses that it implied were very high, in my view. So I'm sure you all know this organization of profits that the global value chains have. The profits are when you are developing the prototypes, and then again when you put your brand in there. But here it is in assembling and manufacturers. It is the profits are very, very thin. So Milberg, as you mentioned, my thesis advisor, in one of his books, he had this idea that the Prebisch-Sinker hypothesis for the 21st century was exactly related to global value chains, the asymmetries of market structures, and I would argue of economic power. So this oligopoly, again, it was a kind of a standardization, a commoditization process for manufacturers, in which we had an oligopoly of companies buying, and then you had a systematic pressure for bringing prices down for suppliers, because otherwise I'm not going to buy these T-shirts if you sell them at more than this. I can go this place, and so that really has affected the way that countries have tried to export manufacturers. And this is what I observed when I first started talking about this. Remember conversations with Jose Antonio Campo, talking about the future of manufacturing, that it was so important. But I found this data in the UN. This is the manufacturers' terms of trade of manufacturers produced by developing countries as compared to manufacturers produced by developed countries. And since the start of the series, because I think if we had a farther series, we could see that it started a little bit on the 70s already. But certainly over the 80s and especially when China joined the WTO, you can see that the trend has been going down. So this is what I wanted to mention about manufacturers. Now I want to turn back to commodities, to primary products, to why is it that we shouldn't continue thinking about the primary products as commodities. We also need to make a change. I mean, we also are conditioned by this idea of we can only sell as wholesale, because otherwise we are competing with our toasters in the case of coffee or something. And then, and when I say we, it's governments, anybody who wants to put policy with the governments that negotiate in WTO. They are thinking about selling in bulk and how they can get lower subsidies in Europe so that they can compete. It's all about price. Everything is about price. And prices are, the likelihood of prices changing is very low. And I have an interesting quote to show you later about that. But it is clear that the character of many products has been changed. Has been changing very fast since the 70s with coffee, and more recently with chocolate, cocoa, the percentage of cocoa. And you see countries exporting really beautiful packaged chocolates and coffee, like the one Marilia gave me as a gift. And there are different strategies of how to get a little bit more value added on this. And as you will see later, it's argued that, okay, this is very small, niche markets. But even if it is, it's something that can really change the relationship of the countries with the products that they have. So let me talk a little bit more. So this is the coffee value chain. I'm sorry for the size of the words, but so the production is in the tropics. It corresponds to early colonial trade. There are no economies of scale in general, and it's very difficult to mechanize. That's the case, at least in the earlier producers of coffee that have very little land for that. The farmers are 95% small farmer producers. So obviously you bring the idea of how can you coordinate if everybody is very small farmers, and how can you get something better than that if the negotiation power is so small. We have 5% plantations, and very, very little family enterprises that maybe now it's more, but that would take the products and do something to them well enough so it will be sold not as wholesale, but as unique products. So the majority is in Africa and Latin America, and mostly Brazil, and recently Asia. The small farmers are mainly in Africa and Latin America. The plantations are mostly in Brazil, and recently in Asia. And the family enterprises are perhaps a model that was seen in Colombia before the Coffee Federation. So the support that coffee producers get is from state agencies. They help for primary processing. They try to basically help in the standardization process and in see the qualities of them. And more recently, in many countries, they may have started to see, okay, if we sell this depending on the origin, or we give it a label, it may sell more. Then you have the roasted coffee. So the roasters are the ones that get the most of it. And when you ask somebody who has been working on coffee for many years, that you ask them, like I did actually to Aponte, so why are you still toasting only in developed countries? Why is it that you export there and then they re-export and get you everything else? And the answer that he gave me surprised me. He said, because it's very difficult to put it in a can and isolate it in a way that it will be fresh enough so the consumer will get it later. And in my view, and I have been discussing this with coffee producers in Colombia, and coffee that are trying to work with this, is that's not true anymore. I mean, you can, I mean, this is not fourth industrial revolution technology. I mean, you can certainly process coffee and put it in, and toast it and ground it and put it in a can and sell it. And in developing countries, many are doing it. But still, the stigma of this, or the idea of the old days, is still very powerful. Okay, so then you have what's happening from the last years with thanks to NGOs and to the protests that we have had, because it's obvious that the farmers are receiving below wage levels and not benefiting from this at all. Maybe the countries may benefit because they get the sales for wholesaling, but the producers, the farmers, are still in extreme poverty. So what came? So you had fair trade. We started being very strong, but it's still. So you have 2% right now of relationship coffee. That is kind of what you see when you get to a place in which they tell you this coffee comes from this farm that's far away, and you can see the pictures of the family. So this is relationship coffee. It's only 1%, but it's increasing, has increased very much in the latest years. Fair trade never came too far, only 2%, and it was very fast seen as a marketing strategy for big multinational corporations. And one that is growing very fast also is the idea of single origin. But again, who is getting the benefits from that? It is Starbucks. It is the companies that sell Café de Colombia. That trademark has been there for 60 years. Even the World Intellectual Property Organization has studies that suggest that why not use that? Why not use intellectual property as the way that the French use champagne that has to be from this area, the cheese? It is not that a family decided that we want to be champagne or have this cheese that has this name and can be sold at exorbitant prices. It is a policy of the government on developed countries. And so these are things that can be done, but are not being done high enough because people think it's too small, there are niches, and it's going to be a benefit in terms of more profits. That's going to be too short because everybody's going to notice that we're doing this, and then not everybody can be special. And that's a strong argument. But still, it is a trend, and it is a trend also in terms of those that are intermediaries. Like that, I had a conversation with a fund that was investing in coffee, and and they decided to start importing, processing and using coffee that was very specialty and this. And the person told me it grew in a year from 1% to 25% of our portfolio, and we are thinking to go for 50%. This is something that is profitable. So there are many levels in which primary commodities could be much more beneficial for the countries and even for the farmers themselves. Okay. So this is just to show who are the roasters. They are Starbucks, Nestlé, Lavazza. They are all US or Europe located. And what can we see? If you have, before it was, 2.5 pounds for a cup of coffee, how much do the farmer receive? 1 pound, 1 penny. Yes. So the rest, this is the roaster cost and margin. And obviously, I mean, if you are selling, you have to pay the rent and staff and tax, but still you have a very high profit. And so this is a very shocking image. I mean, it is something that I'm amazed that it's not more advocacy of this with the consumer. So I had the pleasure to meet the head of the Global Commodity Fund 3 weeks ago. And this is a global fund that was created maybe around when UNCTAD was created, and it has been working with small farmers and trying to see what to do. And it really kind of ignited in me to think about this all over again. Like, we have to be able to do new things. And he is doing a lot of things. They are doing kind of like QR codes that go from, and the chains, the technology, blockchain, yes. They are doing all sorts of agreements with some companies. But again, there is a company that is willing to pay much more to a producer, but the producer is scared that the others will not, that he will lose because he will be selling to this, because the other two buyers are not doing the same. But it's still a negotiation that can get better. I mean, there are things that are being done. In the example of the coffee and chocolate that Marilia gave me, they are doing a lot for fair trade, and they are also doing a lot to get elected. Because if you are in the government, you can start to point out, well, this may be like this forever, but it is your interest that is being benefited from this, and maybe we can change things. Okay. So the cocoa value chain is the same or worse, because in this value chain, for sure, they have child labor. They made big buzz that they will be eliminating child labor at least until 2005, but obviously right now nothing, because if you keep competing to price, there is no way that you're not going to have the producers trying to have the lowest cost possible. There is no way. No regulation is going to help that. And so just to go quickly over it, so it's very, very concentrated in terms of countries where it's produced. Again, it's very difficult to mechanize. The farmers are mostly 90% small farmers, and maybe a 10% plantations in Latin America. The majority of the small farmers are in Africa that also have a colonial relationship with Europe, that are the ones that import there. And there is also the issue of certification that I didn't mention before. You think, okay, you certify that it's fair trade, you certify that there is no child labor, but those are things that are very expensive to do, to bring a certification. And at the end, they again benefit the ones that can pay more. So those that are only competing over price cannot do that. So it's kind of a trickle down of bad results. And again, the big companies are benefiting much more about fair trade. This is fair trade, but who is promoting it? Hershey's. And if you look at their reports, they are not free of child labor or necessarily doing this. So the processing and generating chocolates and selling it to you as oh, this is delicious sweet chocolate is done by Europe. And there's also this idea of only things that come from Europe or the US are good, because you know that they were done in very well done, and they have these machines that produce the most velvety coffee. And that perception that we all have, that European things may be better, or maybe US also may be better, but mostly European. It's something that also needs to be changed, and it's changing. If you see it in the chocolate market in New York, you can buy chocolate from Costa Rica, from others, and they compete not on price. They compete on quality and attractiveness, and they found this idea of doing a more percentage of cacao instead of milk. So it can be done, and it is being done. But governments are not talking about this in general. Governments are still discussing how to get the bulk of the crops. So I'm not arguing for them to stop doing that, but to also do the other part. It's not going to be too costly for the government, but because people cannot imagine this. And the technology that we have right now, even if it's the access is not generalized to the global population. It is still available in middle cities. So the possibilities of people interested in doing a good business are there. They can just go, okay, to the farmer and say, let's do this, and the mutual benefits are there. So yeah, we have a dramatic situation for producers. So more than 90% of coffee in volume is still sent outside in green form. The processing of coffee is mostly the domain of highly industrial countries in the north. A small number of non-producer countries have significantly increased exports of coffee. If you look at trade data and you look at who exports coffee and coffee in particular, it's Europe. They don't produce any beans of coffee, nothing, zero. But they are the biggest exporter, like without a doubt. And you may say that that was normal in the past, and that comes from the tradition. But in the last years, it's also has also increased. The premium that they receive has increased 300%. Maybe this is in the next one. Yeah, so the markup, for example, in African coffee, there is this Angus Elsby have a really interesting publication on this that I invite you to look at. But so he shows that the African coffee is now re-exported by Europe at an average markup of 300% compared to just 50 in the 70s and 80s. So it's not only that they are keep doing what they have been done forever, but they are getting even more. It's becoming part of the benefits in their balance of payments. So it is an issue of fairness in trade that transcends the colonial relationships. And why is that? Because obviously you have the control, whoever controls the value chain of the product is the one that's going to be setting up the conditions. And anytime that there is any kind of pushback, the threats of, okay, you're out of this value chain or something like that, it's never, it scares everybody, but it still needs to be talked about. So that's what I wanted to do today, to talk about these issues. Okay, so this person and also the head of the Global Commodities Fund argue that if you really want to tackle poverty, if it's not just kind of a lip service, but if you really want to tackle poverty, yes, external debt is a very big issue right now. But if you pay better for the exports from developing countries, you will be doing much more for the balance of payment of the countries, and also for the people that produce them and are living way below poverty levels. So this is what I was going to say at the end. So this company has been, Dutch company has been producing chocolate and paying much more to the farmers. And so they asked the competition in this interview. So the competition said there is no economic textbook or management book that thinks that paying more is a good idea. I mean, we have to throw out all our economic books. I mean, I know we all have been trying to change them, and we are more and more popular with our ideas, but that, to me, it's insane. It's insane also the idea that this is not contested. Like, you cannot criticize capitalism in any way, even when it is so blatantly brutal. And if you do it, you're immediately ostracized. Like, oh no, so you want something else? No, but the levels of profit, again with the pandemic, the fact that everybody was suffering and most 4 billion people didn't have any social protection, and the technology companies were just kind of literally going to the moon for fun. to me, it's depressing, but it also kind of ignites my passion to try to do something, to bring voices, to discuss these issues. So, can we do something, or it is just a dream that we shouldn't even try to do? I think it's true that it may not be scalable immediately, but if we don't start somewhere, it's never going to be. We're never going to know if it could be done. The technology has changed so much that your producers are much closer to the final consumers. And the final consumers, like the global commodity funds, they are thinking about, okay, so what if you don't compete on the prices, but you create this idea of paying tips? You pay tips to the barista. How about you also pay tips to the producer? And you could implement something like that with a financial inclusion set up to pay them for some tips for the good products that you're getting. Intellectual property rights are being used, and even the World Intellectual Property is pushing for this in the latest reports of 2019. Geographic denominations are important. People are really paying attention, and the big companies are benefiting from this. Why not our countries? So I've already said all of this. So public advocacy is crucial. We need to be talking about these issues. We need to be showing and doing more research about this. Okay, so another argument, as I started with marketing and business administration, again, it is not that a product is a primary product is a commodity. It is that the person who is selling it sees it that way. So there are no mature products. This particular Harvard Business School argument professor has. They are only mature managers. So we have to change the managers of our primary products. We have to ignite on them the idea that things can change. And they need to change in order to generate any significant scalable change. Otherwise, it's just going to be still maybe people from Europe or the US benefiting from these, traveling to the developing countries, generating the relationship with the farmers, and getting all the profit. Thank you so much. That's what I had to say.
Okay, so I'll pass to João.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to participate in this talk. I'd like to congratulate Mariangela. It was a very, very interesting presentation, and it's indeed very close to a lot of the works I have been doing, and a lot of other colleagues here in CDPLA. And I was intrigued, and it was very, very interesting to see this analysis of the chain, and how can we think of the room for improving quality in primary products and other related basic manufacturers. Because if you think of, if you, for instance, cheese, it comes from a primary product, but then it gets into a manufactured process. And what I was thinking is that if you think in the traditional structuralist analysis, or in terms of more modern approaches, for instance, in terms of the economic complexity analysis of Hausman and Roderick and Hidalgo and others, that propose that we need a more radical structural change in order to get developed. And I was thinking during the presentation, what's the room for improving quality and getting the benefits that are clearly there in terms of producing better quality coffee and cheese, for instance. it's interesting because Minas Gerais is famous for our cheese, and we're doing this right now and creating these regions that produce particular cheeses and these kind of things. And there's clearly a lot of benefits there, and I was thinking maybe not only in terms of the products, but in terms of employment as well. There's always a question that, well, if we change towards more high-tech products, then usually do not create that much employment and a different kind of employment. So I was basically thinking about that and would like to hear your thoughts on this. Is this enough that we try to improve the quality in terms of the examples that you gave, or you still think we need a more radical structural change, or we could try to combine the two processes? Because in the end, it's and of course, as you mentioned as well, we need to change this mindset or this culture of how we compete. And it's tricky, but it's possible. But maybe would benefit also from doing the two things together, moving to more high-tech products and trying to bring the quality of what we already produce. So, but this was more or less what I was thinking about the presentation. And again, it was very, very nice to hear these thoughts. I think it's changed a little bit the paradigm that we normally see in the structuralist analysis. And congratulations once again.
Thank you so much. Is it okay if I respond and then with the question? Okay. Thank you so much. I have noticed the cheeses. It's fantastic. It's beautiful. It's invigorating. I love cheese. I think doing processing close to the primary products that you already produce is completely natural and as good as you can get initially, because you know the product, you know it very well, and if you get some technology, you can produce things that are really, really good, and as Hausmann and Hidalgo clearly show it, that's very beneficial. You would worry about employment, but I think that's a false worry, because if you bring technology but you're doing it yourself and you're kind of thinking about it, and you're going to bring employment in the parts for the machines. You're going to bring employment on other things. Maybe you're not making the person make each piece of cheese, but you're still having people who need to know how the machines work, who need to know, and you generate an intern and the basic value chain of that can help you on that, on marketing. On one thing that I think it's really not that discussed is that, and teaching administration in developing countries is crucial. Like, one of the things that is more shocking is that just by bringing somebody who knows how to administer and move and kind of the logistics of the processes can take one small project into make it into a big project. But that's something that you don't think about necessarily as a government. You think about, you need scientists, you need higher education in many things. But because we are human beings, and because it's so difficult to coordinate ourselves, even to go for drinks after dinner, if you have more than 10 people, it's impossible. The same is true in terms of how you organize a business. So I would think that it's not only about bringing a technology and mechanizing and trying to sell it better, but it's also about how do you administer everything, how you market it, and it's not as difficult. I mean, that's something that you can learn, and that's something that stays in the company. That's a learning by doing that is really important. It seems small, but it is so important. So I think I'm really happy that you're thinking about this way. And of course, I mean, when you talk about structural change doesn't happen one day after the next. It's something that builds on what you get good at it. If you try things and you make mistakes, but you keep trying, you're going to get better at something. And you can, and by example also. So if a sector sees that this sector is doing this well, they can learn to do it in another sector. And it's kind of a rolling ball of possibilities that are open. And yeah, if you're immediately thinking about exporting, it's not going to be so easy, because clearly the trading system is organized in a way that it has no incentives, or even goes against any mechanization or any processing from developing countries. That's absolutely clear. But still, what happened with the global value chains was that governments and trade policy that was so important until the 70s, when it was a country producing something, and then you had trade barriers. After the global value chains, those trade barriers are less and less relevant, because you have to import to export, and because it's really a world of multinationals and producers. So these trade barriers, again, it's not something to be afraid of. It's something that with technology you can access markets, and then you can find ways, and then eventually you can scale up. Maybe I'm going to just be very corny and quote John Lennon, but maybe I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one.
Okay, then. Thank you, João. So we can open for questions. Let's see.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. And I'm not specialist on trade. I am macroeconomist. And I'd like to hear you about the problem of Deutsche disease, that I think that is probably more important in Latin American economies than Africa, because in Africa there is no diversification of the productive structure, but in Latin America you have more diversification. And how do you see this problem of Dutch disease in Latin America in particular?
Let's just collect some questions first, then.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. I'm not also a specialist on the subject, but two things I wanted to hear from you. First, you mentioned that in the cocoa and coffee sector, there are over 90% of small producers, right? So should we expect a change if this process of innovating and creating the local brands, is it feasible to do it with small producers? We need some concentration, or should we expect a concentration of producers, so not being such so many small producers, more concentrated market? And some African countries are thinking of, I don't know in which step they are, but about making like a OPEC from cocoa. And I'd like to hear that from you also, if it's happening, if it would be a good thing or not. Okay. Thank you.
So one more question, maybe? No? can get this first round and then get a second round later.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, the issue of the Dutch disease is really terrible in Latin America, and the diversification that was maybe strong in some countries up until the 80s, 90s. I'm talking about Colombia in particular, for example. Yeah, the Dutch disease about oil and, in Colombia is clear. I mean, it was diversified. There was a lot of industrialization going on, and as soon as the Cusiana was discovered, the push for exporting oil and bringing this, I mean, it's kind of the majority of the exports now in Colombia are oil. It used to be coffee, but now it's oil, and that has happened in other places in which the prices are good. When China was importing everything from the 2000s, it was very difficult to really push for exporting something else that was not being demanded by them in terms of metals, and the countries that exported that benefited a lot. So it is a serious issue. It is very difficult to prevent it. In a way, the issue is also that about your exchange rate. It really makes it, it overvalues your exchange rate, right? And that makes also much more expensive to do anything else in industrialization. But I mean, other countries in Europe have had those disease, and then government policies make a big difference. I haven't studied this in many years, so I'm really talking about from memory. So it is a serious issue, and I know it has affected not only Colombia but other countries in Latin America. Latin America never really participated in global value chains in a way that was significant to change many things. So the diversification of the economies was a little bit more coming from inside. Not that benefited Latin America too much either, but at least that's something that you can observe. But yeah, when you get a commodity prices boom, it's very hard to manage. You have to have capital flows controlled. You have to have all sorts of different ways to really maybe save for the future, but that's very difficult to do contracyclically. Things are good. Why are you not enjoying when things are good? You never think that things are going to get bad. So it's very difficult to do countercyclical policies in these ways. But there are countries that have done funds for commodities that have been successful, like Chile for copper and others. And that's something really important. If you get a boom on exports, to really save for the future, to really try to use it to invest in technology, to invest in understanding what the next possible boom in export that may happen. Like if you think only on the one that you are having and only on the products that you already produce well, you're not going to be able to compete in the future. You have to be thinking, what's next? Is it biotechnology? Is it there are many different things that and development comes in waves in a way. Like you have the semiconductors, and then you have the biotech. I mean, it is important to be looking forward to what's coming. Also, not only be better in what you already produce. Thank you for the question, because that's important. It's not only about being better and exporting better and getting higher value in what you already produce, but that's why structural change is also important. You also have to be looking at what's coming. How can I get in the next possible boom and be there for that? And maybe the technological one in terms of computers and things is gone, it's past. But even that, Costa Rica benefited from it. The next one, I mean, obviously we cannot really prevent it. I mean, know what it's going to come, but certainly if you prepare yourself, you can be better to when it happens after that. That's what I would say there. I mean, I don't think it's necessary to have concentrated production because you can. I mean, it's important to have a kind of coordination, collaboration, not being the only one that goes to with such a big difference in power to sell something, because obviously you're going to always be too small to really affect the price. So coordination is important. Again, going to the example that I know the best is Colombia. You have the Federation of Coffee Producers, and that has been really instrumental in saving money, in keeping farmers not under the level of poverty in coffee areas at least. And it was really successful up until the end of the international agreement for coffee. But after that, when they started competing only on price, they have not been, they are kind of also an old institution. They are not thinking about what can be done and how to do it differently. They have too many people that depend on them to take risky decisions. So when Colombia had the possibility to stop selling coffee in the New York Stock Exchange, but do it in a place for specialty coffee, it was too risky. It was not done. It was discussed, but it was not done. But that doesn't mean that the next president may feel a little bit more inclined to do things by seeing the example of other countries that are benefiting from something like this. And in terms of the OPEC for cocoa, I mean, and also, it is very difficult to have very big plantations in Africa. It's very, very difficult. The land, the way that it's protected, the plant itself, it's not so easy. If you have big extensions of area, you can maybe mechanize much more and do it like that. But in Africa, at least what I read was that it was very difficult. That it was necessarily going to be something small, and they need to be much more coordinated. And they need to be. They're doing things that I think Latin America should also still be thinking about, which is integration of the markets, which is creating a minimum market for the things that they have. And I think an international agreement of the prices of cocoa can help, especially if you look at the issue of child labor, if you look at the issues of living below levels of poverty, if there is enough public pressure to those countries that are getting 300% of the benefits, it could be beneficial. It could be. But I'm not sure the world has changed enough to make it really politically feasible. Hopefully it could be, because I believe that the international coffee agreement was crucial, because we were the producers, we knew, and we could have a say on this. As soon as that was gone, it really lost the benefits of having coffee in your country. As we all know.
So we have time for a second round, maybe. Okay. Do we have like a female economist that wants, like, I can help to formulate a question. You don't need to be shy. You can formulate in Portuguese. Isabella, maybe. Isabella is a student of ours. She makes the most clever questions all the time. And actually she's doing a lecture on structural change. So she's doing a course, yes. Okay then, so don't feel shy.
Thank you for your brilliant presentation. We are here in Brazil facing an election on the next weeks. And we have we are worried about many things. One of them is the industrialization of the country. That is, it's a process that it's ongoing by some decades, but the agricultural sector is getting more importance on the discussions, and the influence of the agricultural sector are from the soybean exporters and beef exporters that are responsible for deforestation of the rainforest. And so how we can face those threats, and if we can advance on global value chains on these kind of products, or what we can done to reduce the power and the political influence of the soybean exporters and the beef exporters, and even iron ore, that I think it's have some environmental impact that are not neglectable. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm not sure if it's a very good question, but I've been thinking just how applications on 4.0 industries could help. We got a new bank in banking, and we got Quinto Andar in immobiliary. So I was thinking that, is there any kind, any form that we could formulate policies that would give incentives from tech companies to closure up agriculture producers to final consumers, so that we could, through policy incentives, enhance and slow the distance among producers and consumers, and enhance the direct flows. And how does, well, not sure, that's it. Thank you so much.
Let me just say that the chocolate and the coffee that I bought to Mariangela was from MST. So,
If there are no more questions, then I'd like to add one as well. It's maybe complementary. I would like to ask you to maybe explore and talk a little bit more about the policies that can be that have been used, that can be used to incentivize these types of changes. So as you mentioned, like, you can increase the administration courses and create these areas, and those are so I think complements the question, what else can be done in terms of policies?
Thank you so much. Okay. The products that I spoke about are products that are that can be, in a way, luxury products: coffee, chocolate, vanilla, cashews, and others. There are other products that are more of a input for production, or kind of part of the food systems, in the food systems that depend on soybeans and things like that. It is difficult to think about how to decommoditize them, and they have tremendous consequences. In Colombia, we have palm oil, and they are products in general, like also beef, that need big extensions of land to be produced, and that obviously have, because of that, a lot of old power, like power coming from people who have owned the land for many, many, many years. And fighting their interests is something that is really hard. It's really hard. I mean, just from my personal experience, only after a peace agreement, 50 years of war, we were able to kind of think that Uribe was not such a good idea, because he represented the big landowners, and it's undoubtable that there was enhanced violence, and that peace was never going to be achieved that way. And in the last elections, well, we didn't have the one that Uribe selected, but this was after many years of opening and informing of what was happening. So it is not very hopeful from that experience to say it's going to be easy to fight the powers of the agricultural industrialized sector that does that. But it's also in their own interest to be seen perhaps as against climate change, in possibly if the higher power is not depending on that, and is not denying that, for example. So there are pressures that come from the international discussions and the crisis of climate change that may make these producers a little bit more aware of things. But the country may not be ready to do that yet. The country may be still depending, like the countries that have oil. You cannot tell them to stop producing oil, because that's what they have, that's what they depend on. You can tell them, start doing different things so that you're ready in the future to produce more. Like, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, for example, has been doing a lot of technological advances, but they have a lot of resources. It's different. So, I mean, it's being done here to try to get a change a little bit in the policies is important. It is it's a difficult question. It's a very, very difficult question, but it's. I mean, you could even see in soybeans maybe a change in the future. I mean, soybeans and tofu in particular, it is something that is very important in the markets in the US and Europe, because people want to be healthy. So soybeans are super important. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if very soon you could see some countries saying, okay, these soybeans have been produced this way, and it's better for your health, and it's organic and things like that. That's something that could happen. Why not? With iron and beef, it's difficult. So we all have kind of sectors that have traditionally been very powerful, and it's very, very hard to fight that. That's my personal response to that. And in terms of getting close to the consumer, I think one good thing that has come from these years is that industrialization is no longer a bad word. It is kind of something that even the World Bank or the IMF would use in the discourse, and that was something that was not industrial policy. That was not something that was possible in 20 years ago. It was completely taboo to talk about industrial policy, but now it is being talked about. The development banks in many countries are playing a big role again, and they can really help with providing access to the internet, with providing access to marketing strategies. By modernizing the way they see things, they can help bringing the producers closer to the consumers, and that's something that is definitely happening. But what I think should happen, is that the countries take it as something that they can do, and not wait for Starbucks to come to do it for them.
Okay, then. So I think we can have a last round, if maybe. What do you think? Alguém tem alguma pergunta a mais? Senão a gente pode fechar também. Fiquem à vontade. Okay, then. So thank you again, Mariangela, for this great presentation. João.
Thank you so much. It's really, really a pleasure, and I hope we can keep working together, and you can send me emails and ideas, and we can keep discussing. It's really very important for me to be able to bring new ideas and kind of new arguments why things could be different. And without this trip, I wouldn't have been able to formulate what I said to you this way, because I never have time to really think about these issues. And I will also keep you informed if we really are able to bring this advocacy to the big forums that I organize and create a line of research on these issues, precisely to think more about the policies. Because I think the reason why it has not been studied is because people cannot imagine it happening. So we have to show them that it is already happening and that you can help foster it. So this is kind of my dream. I have a SDG investment fair that brings small projects from developing countries to investors, and we need a lot of help. They need a lot of help to kind of bring those products, but they also need new ideas. And we also have the Financing for Development Forum, in which ministers come and discuss. And I mean, there are places in which we can certainly bring advocacy for things like this, and that things can also advance, even if in the surface you can see things being very difficult and you cannot publicly be talking about them. The work is still being done, and it's important to keep working on these things, because at some point things are going to get a little better, even if temporarily. And that's when you have to be ready to really push for the changes and the possibilities that you think can make your country better. Thank you.
The Amazon was the ingredients from the Amazon, and we needed a French chef to bring tucupi to São Paulo. Like,
Yeah. And there's also this image that we don't value when we do.
exactly.
believe that